king, would soon walk the way of the cross to glory. He even slept the night in that God-forsaken town of Nazareth. Then he slipped unnoticed across the Jordan River into what we now call the West Bank, through the hills of Damascus to his own city of Palmyra. The journey had been hard for Melchior. He had lost weight, the features of his face, and they were covered by a peasant's beard. So well had Melchior learned the dialect of the peasants that he passed undetected, not only through his city, but also through the very palace gates. Even in his own home, they didn't know him. He was home at last, but still unrecognized, so he made a game of the masquerade. Pretending to be a shepherd from the hills, he found employment in his own palace. Melchior became a servant in his own household, and he even dared to serve the queen, his wife. But days turned into weeks, and soon it ceased to be a joke. No one recognized him as their king. His pride was shattered. His confidence was down, and only his prayers sustained him. To his bosses on the palace staff, he was just another one of those people from the hill, the Hicks. He wasn't even seen as a person, just another piece of the palace machinery. He was punished once. He almost lost his job, but they whipped him instead, because he had dared to reach out and serve the guards of the palace as an equal, not kneeling first and reaching up to those who thought that they were his masters. What concerned him most was his wife, the queen, who didn't recognize him, and there seemed to be nothing he could do to give himself away. Then he saw that she didn't even know her own children any more than she knew her servants. Perhaps she had not seen him or thought of him as a person since those days long ago when they were courting. But she was much too busy now, too preoccupied by her position. When he looked again at his own children, he realized how little he himself had known them when he was the king. And they were not children living the lives as they are now, but rather living as something they were going to become, heirs to the throne. In that moment, Melchior envied the baby he had seen lying in that unpretentious manger. For any home can go sour when people are seen as objects and positions taken as precedent over relationships. Of course, it was his youngest child who broke the spell. She watched him, this strange servant from the hills, and one day she caught him watching her with that look of love that she had never forgotten. Across the room, she ran to him. She threw her arms around his neck, shouting and weeping all at the same time. For children know us as we are, not as we pretend to be, even to ourselves. As the spell was now broken, suddenly everyone recognized him, and he showed the seal of his father's, which he still wore around his neck. There followed a great feast with the royal robes, but the beard he kept to remind the people of his kinship with the people of the hills. Melchior set out a proclamation that children should be precious for their own sake, and not for what they might someday become. And families should be sacred, for God had become a child in Bethlehem. And not just in the temples of the land, but in every home should be a house of prayer. Prayers should rise like incense, like frankincense, which he had once left beside the baby in the manger. For when Melchior had seen the child, he had come another way home. Let's do the fourth verse. Murder. Balthazar was the most different of the Magi. He was the youngest. He was filled with the contradictions of youth. He traveled alone without family obligations. yet he was keenly afraid of death. He alone was the brash and outspoken in front of King Herod, demanding to know where the child would be born. But when they came to Bethlehem, he was the last to lay his gift before the helpless baby Jesus. His gift was myrrh. Balthazar had sharp eyes and a brilliant mind, yet he was the most sensitive of the three wise men to human need, to sorrow, and to the suffering of others. In his hands were the physician's art of healing, but in his heart there was also the fear of death. The myrrh he brought was a costly ointment made from the sap of reeds on both sides of the Red Sea, and it was used to heal the sores of the living and embalm the bodies of the dead. Leaving Bethlehem, Balthazar's route was south, through what is today war-ravaged Gaza, on the way to Egypt, where he had learned the mysteries of the healing art. Then on to Khartoum, in what we now call Sudan, where his father wore the crown. At first, Balthazar stayed in Bethlehem, waiting for the others with their bigger caravans to take their leave. He waited, hoping that the separation might bring protection to this little child. After a time, he too left Bethlehem, glad to leave behind that overcrowded town swollen by the Roman census, and glad to be free again into the pure, cold darkness of the desert night. But perhaps because he missed the bright star, or perhaps because he had another dream, or perhaps because he felt guilty about how aggressive he had been toward Herod in telling him about the Holy Child, and he feared that his words might bring disaster. We don't know why, but Balthazar could not bring himself to leave the province until he was sure that the child was safe from Herod's evil schemes. Balthazar was the one who stayed behind among the people of Bethlehem in their darkest days. He was the one that stayed when the destruction descended on the innocent firstborn by the sword of Herod. He was the one who comforted the sorrowing, who healed the wounded souls of that grief-stricken town. He stayed healing, but also searching, trying to find out if the baby Jesus had survived that local Holocaust, not too far from the Gaza of today. It was a strange juxtaposition. Balthazar cared for people who were dying, yet he himself was afraid of death. He was forever asking what had become of the child, who even the stars had said would be the bridge between this world and the next. Balthazar left town finally, and he made his home among the refugees, the homeless, the outcasts, and the fragments of families. He worked among the tents of rejected people, the colonies of lepers, the lame, the blind, and cared for those whose bodies no longer sustained life. In time, the spies of Herod found him. His questioning about Jesus betrayed him, as did the ring that he wore on his hand, the hands that he used for healing. But Herod's men did not kill him. They did not even touch him. For on the hand that held the ring had developed the rough scales of leprosy. In his work of healing others, Balthazar had himself become diseased, much like the heroic Ebola nurses and doctors in Liberia and Sierra Leone today. The soldiers laughed at this strange twist of fate, the leper king, they called him. They drove him from the land into the wilderness, into the desert to die like a dog, alone. But this time, Balthazar did finally walk south, toward the place of his origin and his healing arts. But his flesh was spotted and rotting, and few would give aid to this man who had helped so many others. Balthazar had the will to live, the fear of death, but the strength of his youth was gone, and he stumbled along the way and fell, unclean to touch, yet unwilling to die. There he lay until his frail body was lifted and carried in the strong arms of a stranger, and taken into the simple poverty of another refugee home. Balthazar revived with the momentary life of a new medication. He recognized the prayer shawls and smells of a devout Jewish family living as outcasts in the land of Egypt. The strong, rough carpenter hands of a man named Joseph rubbed into his flesh a soothing ointment, which took away the pain, but not the fear. Then Balthazar heard a mother singing a lullaby, and he raised his head There, in the fire's dancing light, he saw the baby, a toddler now tired from playing on the hovel floor, now sleeping in his mother's arms. And in the hands of Joseph, he saw an old flask of myrrh, which had been his, which he had left beside the baby in Bethlehem a long time ago, a lifetime ago. In the care of that family, Balthazar died, knowing that the child of hope had not been killed by Herod's power. He died looking at that infant's face, and he knew for the first time no fear of death. He died in peace as if in God's arms, for once Balthazar had seen the child, he had come another way home. After you have seen the star, what is your other way home? Is it through Gaza?